At the minute, there is genuine concern that the state pension, as we know it, is under threat. As Labour announced a massive review of pensions, rumours are circulating from so-called experts of potential means testing of the state pension. It's this idea that you could pay into a system your whole life, only to then be told you're now too rich to take anything out of that system. But hold on for a second, is this actually the case? What is the future of the state pension? That's what this 100-page report from the IFS looks to answer. They are arguably the most well-respected think tank in the UK and have real influence over government policy and politicians. And it's reports like this that will be considered when discussing changes to state pension, not articles from the Express. While it's not policy, it certainly goes into the details around how state pension might evolve. And today, we're going to break down what they say. Look at the biggest threats to the state pension at the minute, how to fix them, and just get an idea of where the IFS thinks this is all heading.
They have not had the benefit of any state scheme to enable them to make some provision for old age.
Among households with someone aged between 66 and 70, where no one is in paid work, the state pension makes up 71% of income for the poorest fifth and 23% for the richest fifth. It's a sum that very few who are retired could do without. This is not an insignificant sum of money for individuals and couples, where it makes up a big chunk of their total retirement pie. Then if we multiply that not so insignificant amount of cash by the 12 million people who receive it currently, you get a very significant number indeed. Spending on pensions is the second most expensive item of public spending after the NHS. When you throw in all of the pension-related benefits on top of state pension, you get about 150 billion a year. That's more than we spend on defence, public order and safety, transport and foreign aid combined. Look, we all know that maintaining state pension costs the UK a lot of money. But why, all of a sudden, does it feel like the promise of a pension has become unsustainable? Really, there's two reasons. First of all, there are expected to be 25% more pensioners in 2050 than today. The effect of this ageing population is an increase on public spending. So first up, state pension as a percentage of total UK national income increases from 5.1% to 6.4%. We then also see an increase in pension benefits to go alongside this. The OBR believes that this movement of 1.3% will be an extra 32 billion a year in today's money. If this was an isolated event, it might be okay. But alongside this, the healthcare costs will of course also rise to deal with the extra healthcare needs of the elderly. The extra spending on healthcare alone is forecasted to be an extra 88 billion a year in today's terms. This rising cost of maintaining state pension for more and more people is the first issue. The second one, though, is born of a commitment, a promise, that's getting hard to keep.
The triple lock, which uprates the state pension every year by either 1, the growth in average wages, 2, the rate of inflation, or 3, 2.5%, whichever is the largest.
So whichever of those three measures is highest in any given year, that's how much state pension goes up by. That's the triple lock. And while on paper it sounds lovely, recently it's made the state pension just go a little bit wild. Between 1992 and the financial crisis of 2008, the triple lock would have only resulted in indexation above average earnings growth in 1 year. 1996, when inflation was 3% but wage growth was 2.9%. But other than that, this was a period of relative prosperity. But since the introduction of the triple lock, we've been through a period of slow growth and economic volatility. Posh way of describing the absolute crap show that we've lived through in the last 10 to 15 years. Because of the triple lock over this period, the state pension has increased by 60%, whereas average earnings have increased by 40%, and the prices of goods and services have gone up by 42%. The triple lock has been too generous, as growth in state pension has outpaced growth in workers' wages and growth in prices. But politicians have protected the lock in order to win votes. Having this triple lock, where there's 3 factors that can increase the state pension, creates huge amounts of uncertainty as to where state pension will end up. The triple lock could easily cost anywhere between an additional 5 billion and 40 billion per year in 2050 in today's terms. This sort of uncertainty is no way to run the second biggest cost for the UK economy, is it? So, let's fix it. Before we do that, let's fix my hairline using today's video sponsor, Manual. Once I turned 30, my hair started thinning. This is really common, there's nothing wrong with it, but me bald is, not a good look. So I started looking for solutions. I wasn't quite ready for a hair transplant just yet, and that's when I stumbled across Manual. I've been using their services now for over 12 months and I've been really happy with the results. It's really easy, just go onto their website, fill out a quick questionnaire, and they'll send you clinically proven treatments in the post. If you want to try them out, I've left a link in the description, and if you use the code DTM55 at checkout, you'll get 55% off your first order, and you can cancel any time. Right, let's get back to the video. First, let's just ask ourselves a question here. What does fixing the state pension look like? Maybe a better question is, What do we want the state pension to do? Polling commissioned for the Pensions Review in the summer of 2023 shows that when working age people were asked who they think have a lot or a fair amount of responsibility to ensure people retire with a reasonable living standard, 85% responded the individuals and their family, 84% responded government, and 78% responded employers. In the main, the British public don't expect state pension to be everything. More, we want it to be a part of our retirements, the base from which we build. We can see the results of this polling reflected in the way that the UK system is set up. This table looks at how much of the median income state pension schemes replace in retirement in different countries. Take all the males in a country, this table measures male earnings, line them up, and the middle earner is the median. Then say, okay, what percentage of that person's income does the state scheme in that country, like our state pension, replace? You can see in places like Italy and Spain, the state schemes replace over 70% of the median income. Now that might sound nice, but Italy, as an example, spend about 16% of their national income just keeping their scheme going. When we look at the amount of UK national income state pension swallows up, it's relatively low compared to other countries. Yes, this scheme is expensive, and the concern is that that expense will continue to grow, but it's not anywhere near the levels of some other Western countries. In the UK, state pension is this base layer that you build a retirement from. It's not enough to live off, but it will mean that you never run out of money completely, even if you live to 120. It can't be expected to provide a high standard of living for every single person, but in conjunction with auto-enrolment and private savings, it should help. This is the functionality that we should look to protect when fixing the scheme. Let's start then with means testing. If you have a certain level of wealth, you won't get a state pension. Australia does this, but the IFS thinks it's a bad idea. First of all, in a system like the UK, where you're saying your retirement is a combination of state, employer, and your savings, by saying to people, if you save too much, you might not get the state component, well, then that just promotes people to maybe not save. Why should I bother saving when, if I don't, I'll get a state pension? Australia introduced their version of auto-enrolment called superannuation in 1992. So they're decades ahead of us in terms of semi-enforced auto-enrolment pension savings. Maybe that makes means testing more viable. I thought means testing was the place we were going, honestly. But after reading this report from the IFS, they've sort of changed my mind. Call it wishful thinking, but the state pension in the UK is a social contract. It's the understanding that today's working generations pay into the system to support those who paid in the past, on the basis that those who are coming through will pay for them. We must protect that social contract for all, regardless of means, because if you've paid in your whole life, you should be able to take out. That is fair. And to say to someone, well, you saved for your retirement, built up a nice pot, sacrificed so you don't get a state pension, but your next door neighbour who blew all of their cash, went on an extra 2 holidays a year instead of saving, they get one. Just creates a weird incentive, doesn't it? It'll create deep resentment in the UK in what is already a divided country. The IFS here are dead against means testing. Okay, what about increasing the age at which we can access state pension then? These so-called experts again love telling us that we won't get our state pension until our mid-70s. This constant jacking up of the age that we can access state pension has been the favoured tactic of governments recently, because there's 2 benefits to them lifting the state pension age for these governments. The first one is they don't have to pay state pension to the people of the previous age, of course. But the second one is they get extra tax revenue for all the people that then have to stay and work. Prior to 2010, women received it at the age of 60. But by 2044, it will be 68 for both men and women. These increases were born out of a desire for equality and increased life expectancies. But this life expectancy point isn't all that it's cracked up to be. These tables show how predictions around life expectancy have changed over time. For someone like me, born in the late 80s, the change in forecast between 2006 and 2020 is around 3 to 4 years. But what about the quality of those extra years? Based on estimates from 2018 to 2020, the difference between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy at ages 50 to 54 for men in England was 11 years, meaning they could expect to spend 36% of their remaining 31 years of life expectancy not in good health. And finally, life expectancy isn't equally distributed. In 2018 to 2020, men in the least deprived 10th of local areas in England could expect to live almost a decade longer than men in the most deprived 10th of local areas in England. If you crank the age at which everyone can retire, you rob us all of retirement in years of good health, especially those of us who are less fortunate, who count on the money to retire. It's all too tempting just to keep whacking up that age year on year, but the impact it has on people is just gross. Employment rates rise as more people have to work, but household income, mental health, life satisfaction, and quality of life metrics all fall. Raising the state pension age to protect the triple lock is giving with one hand and robbing with another. Raising the age higher and higher is not the answer. You might now sit here and think, well, state pension is doomed then. We should just scrap the whole thing and be done with it. Again, I shared that view. I've long discussed the need for radical reform of the scheme, whereby instead of a state pension, at birth we should just stick £5,000 into a junior SIP, which is a pension product for each child, and let that compound away in the market until they reach working age. And then they can start to auto-enroll into that. Let compounding do the heavy lifting. Before reading this paper, I thought that was the sort of reform, the only way that we could fix the pension crisis. But the IFS doesn't agree. We think that much of the basics of the state pension system should stay the same. There should be a flat rate of state pension available in full to most people and claimable starting from a single state pension age. They're much smarter than me, so, I tend to listen to them. So, okay, how do we fix this IFS? Well, they got a 4-step plan. Step 1, don't means test it. They really don't like that means test. Step 2, only increase pension age when longevity in old age increases and never by the full amount of the increase. Step 3, set a target percentage of median income that the state pension will look to meet and set a plan in place on how we get to that target. Remember this table where we looked at what percentage the state pension replaced of median incomes across the world? Well, the IFS think that the government should set a target here. So they might say, we want state pension to replace 30% of median income in the UK. And by doing that, we can then track that value over time. So as wages grow, that number grows with it. We then always know if we're paying a fair amount because we have a defined percentage target that we work to that state pension is looking to replace. Then everyone knows that at state pension age, you will get 30% of the median income at that time. But then that raises another question. What happens if median incomes go backwards? They do sometimes go backwards. Should state pension go backwards? Well, that's step 4, which is best presented by this graph. The orange line is the current triple lock system. Notice how in periods of recession, when average earnings fell, shown in yellow, the triple lock still moved upwards because of the promise of either inflation, wage growth, or 2.5%. That causes the triple lock state pension to pull away from earnings over time, making it increasingly unaffordable. So instead, once the government get to the agreed percentage of median income target, each year the state pension goes up by the same amount as average earnings growth in that year. But when average earnings growth falls, like in times of recession or if inflation is higher, the state pension goes up by the rate of inflation and never falls to make sure pensioners don't go backwards. The line is flat as inflation is shown at the bottom in green as a flat line. They're just trying to show that the state pension maintains purchasing power over the period. Now this next bit is key. As earnings recover here, you see the yellow line is rising. That's earnings growth recovering. The state pension doesn't go up with it. It instead waits until average earnings have caught up to the level where they match the preset fixed percentage of say 30%, and then when they meet up, off they go together again. It sounds complicated to manage, but this is what Australia does with their system. So, it's not something that isn't working elsewhere. Politically, though, the major roadblock is the triple lock. The reason that policy is so popular with older voters is because it's so generous, but it's that generosity that will ultimately make the scheme unsustainable. I think we, all tend to want to rip up the rule book, start again and radical reform to the system, but the IFS thinks that there is a way to make this scheme work long-term for everyone. It will mean making the rate at which it grows a little bit less generous today. A hard pill to swallow, especially if you've got no teeth. But I just come back to this social contract point again, that it's fair for those who are in work today to pay for those who paid in the past. But then I would also say it's only fair for those who take from the scheme today to ensure that it survives for those who'll need it in the future. I don't know what will happen, but this is what the IFS thinks should happen. And I wanted to present the thoughts of the people who know this space better than most, because I think the mainstream media narrative tends to lean towards sensationalism, and people grasp onto that without considering that maybe there are other ways. Politicians might not listen. They might just means test it anyway. But the IFS thinks that would be a massive mistake. If you want to see a list of 17 other pension mistakes that individuals are making all of the time at the minute, then just click right here. Thank you.